Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I've got a video for you about the right to privacy. We're going to be taking a look at arguments against the right to privacy, arguments for the right to privacy, and why this is going to be important for you. The reason that I'm doing this video, and one of the reasons it's kind of important, is because the right to privacy is now an issue in the gaming space. Previously, this would be something in a political arena or a philosophical discussion, but with the introduction of the Xbox One and the always-on Kinect camera and microphone, there are lots and lots of gamers that now find themselves having a right to privacy concern, and I thought it would be an appropriate time to discuss the right to privacy and all the implications and arguments and that sort of thing. There are many ways to discuss this. There are hundreds, thousands of arguments for and against, but we're going to hit on the big two today. The first one that I'm sure you've heard a lot on the TV, especially with the NSA whistleblowing, Prism and Snowden and all that, is if you've got nothing to hide, then why do you care? And the next one that I'm sure you've heard is that the negation of the right to privacy or the right to spy is necessary for protection. This is usually from an external threat. In our world currently, this is terrorism, but it can kind of apply to anything. And what we got first is weak arguments for the right to privacy. These are weak form arguments for the reasons that we believe we want to be private. The number one is, who doesn't have secrets? If you don't have any secrets from anybody ever, then I think you should leave a comment down there and tell me that you just don't have any secrets, or honestly, nobody can do that. Who hasn't lied? Who here has never told a lie in their life? Who hasn't cheated? And who hasn't stolen anything? Again, I consider this to be a weak form argument because it sets the person making this argument up as a bad person or morally very fallible or corrupt to begin with. So it's kind of a bad example, but there's lots of people that do bad things that just don't want to be spied on all the time, or perhaps not illegal things, but, you know, not very good ones. There's also the right to privacy kind of issue. Is like, okay, if you've got nothing to hide and you're not worried about it, then I want you to tell me, when was the last time you jerked off, what hand you used, and what were you watching? Go ahead, go, leave that in the comments. Just tell me what you were spanking it to. Now, there are lots of you that probably really don't care. Some of you might have a sexual orientation that's quite far from normal and really do care because you don't want to be ridiculed or ostracized, and that's something that I think most of us probably wouldn't want. I don't know how the political spectrum is on YouTube. That's kind of an extreme example, and it's like, oh great, so only the perverts and freaks really want their right to privacy, so who cares about that? Again, these are weak form arguments going through them, and another weak form argument is, when was the last time you had to make a stand to a person in power? This is going to be very applicable for those of you that are still in school or college. When was the last time you went to the dean's office to argue about something? When was the last time you went to the principal? Or for those of you that work in retail, or not necessarily retail, really any job, when was the last time you screwed up and you had to go to your boss and explain what went wrong? This is a problem because if you have no right to privacy and they can spy on literally everything that you've been doing, the magical they, the whoever the authority is that you're dealing with here, they could blame anything on going wrong. Oh, well, blah, 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 you performed poorly today. I think that's because you were up drinking last night, or I think that's because you had a fight with your wife. Oh, you didn't do very good. I think that's because I looked at your iPhone and I could tell you were browsing all day. Again, this is a weak form argument because it usually implies some flaw or fault on the person for doing whatever it is that they're wrong. But the core of this argument is a little bit less weak, is that a person in power can use that to kind of lowball you or blackmail you or distort facts against your favor whenever you need to argue your case before another person in power. It's typically not a good thing. And occasionally just good old-fashioned blackmailing, like, well, it looks like we're wrong and our university is going to be put to shame, but we found out you're gay. Now, I can tell everybody you're gay, and you can put us to shame, or we can say nothing and go away. That's kind of one example. Same kind of thing you can do in a workplace. Let's move on to some strong arguments for the right to privacy, and these are the more important ones. And the number one is that it creates an inequality of power. Whenever you, at least in our society in the United States, some countries are different, there is a legal precedent for equality of power between two people. One person is not a lord or a vassal or can order another person to do something, and is legally concerned, they're the same. There are special exceptions, obviously, for the president and vice president and that sort of thing. But if there is an inequality of power amongst people, that's going to typically be those in control of an organization of some kind versus the regular person, the dynamics really change. Instead of being worried that you're going to lose your job, you're legitimately afraid that your boss could ruin your life or manipulate you and things like this. Or instead of going to the police department to report a misconduct on the part of an officer, you have to, and worried about, well, you get backlash for that already, but now you have to worry about the police quite literally spying on you and digging up every single secret or manipulating that as well. This is not a good thing. It also doesn't allow you to escape from mistakes. mistakes. Let's say that you made a mistake earlier in your life, you goofed up, you want to start over, and but you don't have a right to privacy. So now wherever you go, this mistake follows you. Every person you talk to, they know it's easy to look up, it's easy to, and you can't explain it away. You can't change, you can't kind of shake off that old stigma and escape. The next strong argument, which is that, so that's a bad thing if you don't have right to privacy. The next strong argument for the right to privacy is the possibility of misunderstanding. Let's say that all other things are good and you have a legitimate, honest, we're going to just pick on the FBI. Let's say the FBI here knows what library books you're renting, or what ebooks or what website searches you're doing, and they notice that you're doing a lot of stuff about terrorism, how to make a dirty bomb, where to attack a city. We're getting city plans here. We're getting subway rails. We're reading about espionage and counter-espionage and tactics and that sort of stuff. And these are immediate red flags at the FBI, and they say, oh my God, this guy's planning for like a homegrown terrorism attack. We need to arrest him. And you get arrested and you're taken in for interrogation to jail or to wherever it is. And for your trial, the evidence they have against you is that, hey, you were renting all of these books. This is clearly you were planning an attack. You rented every single piece of information needed to make an attack in a short period of time. But what if the reality was that you were an author and you wanted to write a book about the attack on the United States, or an attack, and you want it to be accurate and interesting and viable and technically correct? Or maybe you are a researcher and you're doing research for the probability of people surviving or some genuine benefit to the society. It's easy to make a misunderstanding like that. So this could be bad. I'm going to assume that most people get in this situation will be able to get out of it, but that's still a bad thing that could come with a lack of right to privacy. Perhaps the biggest concern, this is the number one, the kind of the thing that looms over everything, is the probability of corruption. And I ask this to you: do you trust your government? You're going to have various answers depending on what country you're on. Some countries are very corrupt, some not so corrupt. Do you trust the police? Some people are going to say yes, some people are going to say no. Do you trust the FBI, the organization that may or may not be assassinating people? What about the CIA? They definitely do things like that. They're kind of sort of above the law. The NSA, they're not too popular these days. What are they doing? Or, those are extreme governmental examples, but with right to privacy and, let's say, intergovernment and corporate collaboration, not even corporate, just give me organization, we'll say the MPAA, those guys that would love to install DRM on every single computer ever made so that you could never trade movies ever. I mean, they would charge you for listening to music if somebody was driving down the streets playing it with their windows down. Do you trust those people? Do you want them to have access to all of your private information? What about the ACLU? We'll go from a more conservative standpoint. Most people that are conservative hate the ACLU. Not always without reason, but do you really want the ACLU to be able to spy on you? Or we could pick political figures in the United States. Obama, Bush, those are two pretty opposite people. Some people hate Bush, some people hate Obama, some people trust one or trust the other. The problem is, if you get laws in place that allow these sort of things, the leadership can change, but the laws will still stick, and you could get some leaders that you don't like, or companies, Microsoft with the Kinect, and they were actually, I think, one of the people listed on Prism, if I'm not mistaken. What about Google? Imagine all the information Google has about you, or much less Facebook. My goodness, that Facebook information. Well, you've already lost that anyway. And because of all of these factors, you create a very bad inequality of power between citizens and the governments or institutions that they live around. Institutions being pretty much any organization. It doesn't even need to be a corporate one. It could be a nonprofit one or like a community activism thing. But anybody that has information, access to that sort of information, you create a very bad inequality of power, and you get people living in a sort of paranoid state, and our dynamic of freedom and our laws being equal for all people get kind of skewed when this happens. Now, the next argument is what I would consider to be a stronger argument against the right to privacy. This is one of the reasons why maybe you shouldn't be private and things shouldn't be private, and that has to do with freedom versus safety. It usually goes like, we need this data to protect the citizenry from terrorism. We need this to protect you from terror attacks, or depending on the country or the time, it could be like, we need this to protect for Nazi spies. We need this to protect from American spies, depending on what country you could be in. This is for you. It's like, we're not here to spy on you. We're not sharing this with other people, but we just want to protect you. And ideally, in an ideal world, that's true and that's a good thing. However, the saying goes that once you trade a freedom, once you give up a right, you kind of give it up for good. And that's the problem I have with this argument, is that a threat is almost always a temporary threat, unless we're facing like an extra galactic invasion. Let's not deal with that. But terrorism is kind of the thing these days with the ongoing war, like in 1984, or whatever bad guy or boogeyman or army. It's temporary. It will eventually go away, but your rights that you give up, or in this case, the privacy, that's not coming back. It's not like, oh, they're gone Elon, can we have our privacy back? Nah, it's much, much harder to get those back. So while it would be good to protect citizenry, it all depends on how much you trust the institutions that you're giving your data to, and more importantly, how much you trust the people that will come after those. Trading freedom for safety follows a similar path. It usually goes downhill. And the unfortunate thing is that in this space, you're trading at about a 100-to-1 ratio. If we had imaginary units for freedom and safety, or freedom and security, or privacy and security, for every probably 100 points of privacy you traded, you'd really only get about 1 security. And the question is, do you want to live free, or do you want to live period? It's a more difficult argument, but in general, I feel the right to privacy is a very important thing that we have and enjoy in a lot of countries, and this keeps the balance between citizens and the institutions that citizens compose intact instead of out of balance, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Drifter out.